I never thought a simple bow could make me feel like I was dissolving, unraveling into someone I barely recognized. The moment I held it in my trembling hands, I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, like it carried a secret I wasn't ready to face. It was a pale pink, perfectly tied, almost innocent, yet somehow dangerous in its promise. I stared at it, the satin sheen catching the dim light of my tiny bedroom, and I realized, with a mix of fear and thrill, that my life was about to tilt in ways I couldn't predict. I had always been careful, walking through life in the shadows of other people's expectations. My friends, my colleagues, my family, they all saw me as someone reliable, plain, steady. But staring at that bow, I felt a strange tug in my chest, a quiet insistence, whispering that there was more to me than the person everyone else thought they knew. My reflection in the mirror looked the same, but somehow my eyes betrayed me, wide with anticipation and confusion. Then came the blouse. White, crisp, impossibly soft, with delicate lace edging the collar. My hands shook as I touched it, running over the fabric like I was tracing a secret map. It wasn't just clothing, it was a key, a permission slip into a version of myself I had buried beneath routine and propriety. I could hear my own heart thumping, like a warning, like an invitation. I hesitated, imagining the whispers that would trail me if anyone saw me dressed like this, but the hesitation melted into a curious excitement. I slipped the blouse over my head, feeling the fabric slide against my skin, cool and unfamiliar. My shoulders seemed narrower somehow, my chest shifting as though the blouse demanded a new shape. I looked in the mirror again, and the reflection staring back made me catch my breath. There was a softness in my face, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before, framed by the way the blouse fell over me. And the bow waited patiently in my hands, as if daring me to finish the transformation. I knew, deep down, that once I tied it, nothing would be the same. My reflection felt less like a stranger and more like a version of me I had longed for without knowing it. My thoughts spun. Who am I if I step fully into this? Am I brave enough to let the world see me like this? Or am I ready only for myself? With a trembling finger, I fastened the bow at the base of my neck. Instantly, a strange energy surged through me, delicate and terrifying, like stepping onto a stage I didn't remember auditioning for. My reflection smiled back, uncertain yet undeniably alive. And in that moment, something inside me whispered, "You are here. You are real. You can't go back." The room felt smaller, warmer, charged with a new tension, as if it was watching me, holding its breath. I had crossed an invisible line, and there was no returning to the plain, predictable life I had known. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew that whatever it was, it would demand all of me. I sat on the edge of my bed for what felt like hours, staring at the reflection that wasn't fully mine and yet wasn't entirely a stranger. My hands kept tracing the bow at my neck, almost afraid it would vanish if I stopped paying attention. Every detail of the blouse, the delicate lace, the subtle sheen, the way it rested against my skin, felt hyperreal, magnified by the quiet of the room and the pounding of my heart. I had always been someone who planned, someone who measured everything down to the last decimal of comfort and safety. And yet here I was, perched on the edge of a transformation I hadn't chosen in steps but had accepted all at once, like stepping into a river without knowing the current. I glanced at my reflection again, trying to parse what had changed. It wasn't dramatic, not in the way movies make transformations look. There were no sudden flashes, no lightning strikes of identity. It was subtler than that. My face seemed sharper in some angles, softer in others. My shoulders felt narrower, almost delicate. Even my voice, when I whispered a tentative word into the quiet, sounded different, lighter, uncertain. The person staring back was fragile, vulnerable, but also insistent, like she had always been there, waiting for permission. I couldn't stop the flood of questions.
Who am I now?
Am I pretending? Or am I finally becoming? Can I go back if I want to? Or is that line behind me forever? The thought of anyone finding me like this, my roommates, my coworkers, my friends, made my chest tighten. The fear was visceral, a clawing knot that twisted through my stomach and ribs. But beneath it was something else, something quieter, a pulse of exhilaration. I felt free, in a way I hadn't in years. Terrified, yes, but free. I decided to stand, testing the weight of this new identity. The blouse moved differently against my body when I walked. It flowed in a way that made every step feel like a declaration. I tugged gently at the bow again, adjusting it as though its position could dictate how I felt inside. My reflection shifted with me, and I noticed something astonishing. My eyes sparkled differently. Not because of the mirror or the light, but because of recognition. Recognition that this version of me deserved to exist, that she wasn't a mistake, an act, or a fleeting whim. She was real. Then came the question of voice. I had always spoken with careful precision, deliberately neutral, blending into the background so no one would question my presence. But now, the idea of speaking like I used to felt wrong. I tried a few words out loud, hesitant at first, watching as my voice wavered and rose in unexpected ways. The sound made me flinch, then smile, then flinch again. I was both performer and audience, and the stage was terrifyingly intimate. I caught my reflection in a different angle of the mirror, one that showed the blouse's lace framing my chest, the bow knotted neatly at the collar, my hair slightly mussed from the nervous tugging. There was a tremor in my lips, a tightness in my jaw, a slight quiver in my hands. And yet there was also a spark, a subtle curve in my posture that had never been there before. I realized I was standing differently, not better, not worse, just differently. Like I had aligned myself to self I hadn't dared imagine. The inner conflict was almost unbearable. My rational mind screamed caution. This is ridiculous. You can't do this. People will laugh, misunderstand, reject you. But underneath it, my heart and my body whispered truths I couldn't ignore. You've wanted this. You've needed this. And it's okay to be here. The push and pull felt like a storm in my chest. I had never understood fear and longing coexisting so intensely. I took a deep breath and tried something I had never done before. I smiled at myself. Not the polite, safe smile I gave the world, but the one that rose from the inside, shaky and raw. It felt electric. For the first time in years, I felt like I was meeting myself. Not the version the world had written for me, but the one I had always been sketching in secret. The bow, the blouse, the trembling hands, they weren't just fabric and accessory. They were symbols, triggers, and gateways to something profound. Hours passed without noticing. I sat, stood, paced, whispered, laughed quietly, cried quietly, and felt the strange oscillation of terror and liberation. Each movement was a negotiation between who I had been and who I was becoming. I experimented with gestures, the tilt of my head, the curl of my fingers, the sway of my body. Even the smallest adjustments felt like declarations. And then, like a spark in the dark, a thought hit me. I might actually like her. I didn't mean the blouse, the bow, or the reflection. I meant me. The person I was pretending to be, the person I feared, the person I had hidden from the world, and sometimes even from myself. She was awkward, unsure, unpolished. She was quiet. She was fragile. She was luminous. And she was mine. By the time night deepened and the room was only illuminated by the soft glow of the desk lamp, I realized I hadn't moved from the mirror for hours. My reflection looked back, calm, expectant, and profoundly intimate. I whispered her name, my name, in a voice that was both mine and not mine, a bridge between worlds. The sound felt right, like a key fitting perfectly into a lock I hadn't realized existed. Somewhere deep in my chest, a certainty settled. Whatever the world thought, whatever ridicule or misunderstanding awaited me, this was real. And for the first time, I didn't care if anyone else could see it yet. I had found her, and finding her was terrifying, exhilarating, and inevitable. I couldn't sleep that night. The blouse and bow, now neatly folded on the chair, haunted me like ghosts of a self I had never dared acknowledge. My thoughts looped endlessly, a tangle of anticipation, fear, and unspoken longing. Lying in bed, I kept reaching for the invisible thread that connected me to the reflection I had left behind in the mirror, as if touching it again could confirm that she hadn't been a hallucination, a fleeting fantasy. Every breath felt amplified, my heartbeat pounding in rhythm with every imagined glance I might receive if anyone were to see me. I had never understood how fragile identity could feel until now, and it was terrifying. The next morning, I found myself drawn back to the clothes. I touched the blouse as if it were a living thing, soft and deliberate, and felt a rush of heat through my chest. I slipped it over my head again, slower this time, savoring the sensation of the fabric brushing against my skin, the lace tracing my collarbones like it was mapping an entirely new self. The bow waited at the collar, patient and insistent. My fingers hovered over it, hesitating, and I realized with a jolt that tying it meant a commitment far beyond aesthetics. It wasn't just clothing, it was a declaration, a choice to step into someone I had hidden from for years. I tied the bow. Slowly, deliberately, and in that moment, something in me shifted. My reflection felt sharper, alive in a way it hadn't the night before. It was no longer merely a ghost of possibility. It was a tangible presence, staring back with eyes that demanded acknowledgement. I felt my chest tighten with a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. I had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Not completely. I tried to speak, and my voice felt different. Not in pitch alone, but in tone, in rhythm, in the cadence of how the words emerged from my lips. Every syllable seemed to carry weight, as though the act of speaking itself was now an assertion of identity. I whispered my own name, almost afraid to hear it, and it resonated like an echo in a canyon I hadn't known existed inside me. I am here. Saying it aloud, letting it exist in the air, made it real. But reality, as always, has its way of intruding. My phone buzzed on the bedside table, and I froze. A message from a friend, casual and ordinary, and yet it felt monumental. They had no idea who I was becoming, and I felt a wave of panic. Could I respond like myself? Could I maintain the illusion of normalcy? Or would my excitement, my newfound identity, betray me in a way that would leave me exposed? I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, then typed something bland, safe, careful. My fingers trembled as I hit send. The relief was immediate, but it came laced with guilt, the quiet ache of hiding a self that wanted desperately to be seen. I decided to go outside. I needed air, space, a way to reconcile the image in the mirror with the world beyond my walls. The blouse flowed against my skin as I stepped out, and the bow caught the light, drawing glances I wasn't ready for but secretly craved. I kept my head down, heart hammering, imagining judgment in every passerby's eyes, but there was also a thrill in the possibility of being seen, of existing without apology. The world felt sharper, louder, more immediate. I noticed every reflection in windows, every shadow that could reveal a hint of my transformation. And yet, beneath the anxiety, there was a quiet joy, a recognition that this version of me was valid, that she had a right to exist beyond the confines of my bedroom. Walking felt different. Every step was an experiment, a negotiation between the body I had always known and the body I was learning to inhabit. My shoulders felt narrower, my hips shifted slightly, and I caught myself adjusting the blouse almost obsessively. The bow at my neck was no longer just an accessory, it was a symbol of choice, of a self I had claimed with trembling hands and a racing heart. I imagined people looking, judging, whispering, but I also imagined them seeing her and feeling nothing but curiosity, even admiration. That thought made me smile quietly, a small, rebellious act against years of self-doubt. I returned home, heart still racing, and looked in the mirror again. The reflections seemed to have evolved overnight. It wasn't just the blouse or the bow, it was the posture, the way I held my head, the tilt of my chin. There was confidence in her, raw and fragile, but unmistakably present. I touched my face, traced the line of my jaw, felt the texture of my hair, and realized that every hesitation I had ever carried about myself, every moment of self-consciousness, every whisper of inadequacy, was melting into a new awareness. I was not pretending. I was becoming. And yet, the fear remained. Fear of ridicule, fear of misunderstanding, fear of being alone with this truth. I thought about my friends, my colleagues, my family. How would they react if they saw this side of me? Could I bridge the gap between the person they knew and the person I was learning to be? The questions spun in my mind, relentless, demanding answers I didn't yet have. But beneath the fear was a quiet defiance, a stubborn insistence that this was real, that it mattered, that I mattered. I sat down again, the blouse smooth against my skin, the bow tied neatly at my collar. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to imagine a life where this version of me could exist openly, unapologetically. I imagined laughter without fear, gestures without hesitation, days where I could walk through the world without pretending to be someone else. And for the first time, that imagined life didn't feel impossible. It felt necessary, vital, inevitable. I opened my eyes and looked in the mirror once more. The reflection was patient, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for acceptance. I realized that the journey ahead would be neither simple nor easy. There would be doubts, setbacks, moments of despair. But there was also a promise of discovery, of authenticity, of a self that had always existed but had never been allowed to bloom. And, in that moment, I decided that I would not hide anymore. I would not apologize for her. I would meet the world as she, as me, and let the consequences unfold. The first time I left the apartment fully dressed, bow in place, blouse pressed perfectly against my skin, the air outside felt like liquid fire. Each step down the street was deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if I were navigating a world I had never been allowed to touch. The sidewalks were ordinary, bustling with people, yet my perception was anything but. Every glance that might linger on me made my chest tighten and my stomach coil. I imagined judgment in every eye, imagined mockery in every whisper, and yet a strange pulse of defiance kept me moving forward. I wasn't invisible anymore. Even so, reality hit hard. I walked past a cafe where I often went for lunch, and the barista, someone who had always greeted me with polite indifference, looked at me and paused. Just a flicker of hesitation, a micro-expression that seemed to question, and I felt it like an electric shock. My knees trembled, and for a moment I almost turned around, wanted to retreat into the safe anonymity of my apartment. But then I straightened, tugged lightly at the bow at my collar, and reminded myself, she deserves to be seen. I deserve to be seen. Inside, I felt eyes on me constantly. In the subway, in the grocery store, even at the corner newsstand, I imagined people whispering, watching, guessing, and every imagined glance felt like a trial I hadn't studied for. And yet, amidst the fear, there was something exhilarating in simply existing. Every hesitant step, every careful movement, felt like a declaration of identity. My blouse flowed over my shoulders in ways that made me painfully aware of how differently my body occupied space now. I caught myself in shop windows, studying my reflection, adjusting my posture, and noticing details I had never considered. The delicate fall of the fabric over my hips, the subtle curve of my neck, the way my hands rested when I didn't know they were being watched. By mid-afternoon, the tension inside me became almost unbearable. I found a quiet park bench, surrounded by trees that swayed in the mild breeze, and I sat, feeling the pulse of the world around me. I realized that this fear, this scrutiny I imagined or actually felt, was nothing new. It had existed inside me for years. Only now it had a target, a tangible shape. Her, me, my reflection in the blouse and bow. I ran my fingers over the fabric again, and the simple act grounded me. I was real. I existed. And yet, the question lingered. Could the world accept her? Or would they only see the shadows of doubt I carried? It wasn't long before I faced a direct challenge. A coworker spotted me as I stepped into a small boutique, and I froze. Recognition flared in their eyes. confusion mixed with curiosity, and I felt my throat tighten. The internal dialogue was relentless. Turn around.
Run. Hide.
Smile like nothing has changed. I did none of those things. Instead, I allowed a quiet smile to cross my lips, a small, careful acknowledgement that I was still me, only now fully visible. Their expression shifted from confusion to hesitation, and I realized, with a strange mixture of pride and terror, that I had passed the first test of existence outside my private world. I hadn't fled. I hadn't apologized. I had simply been. Still, the social pressure was relentless. I overheard murmurs as I walked through a crowded street, imagined eyes following the line of the bow, imagined judgments about the blouse, imagined questions I wasn't ready to answer. Every step became an exercise in courage. Every gesture, every glance, was both a risk and a revelation. I began to notice something subtle. The world didn't immediately reject me. People's glances lingered, yes, but they didn't always mock or condemn. Sometimes they were fleeting, indifferent, almost neutral. And with each neutral glance, I felt a thread of confidence weaving itself into the core of my being. I could exist. I could be her, fully, without the world tearing me apart. When I returned home that evening, exhaustion settled into my bones. I undressed slowly, carefully folding the blouse and bow, as if they were fragile relics of a day that had challenged every nerve in my body. I stared at myself in the mirror, still fully aware of the reflection I carried. The blouse and bow had left marks, not just on my skin, but on my sense of self. I could feel the subtle tension in my shoulders, the way my stance had shifted, the quiet strength in the curve of my chin. I had survived the world, survived its scrutiny, and in doing so, had glimpsed something powerful, the resilience of a self finally allowed to breathe. And yet, doubts lingered. Could I do it again? Could I face friends, colleagues, strangers, family? Would their acceptance, or rejection, shatter the fragile confidence I had spent hours building? I knew there would be setbacks, moments when I would tremble, retreat, wish to vanish. But there was a new awareness now, sharp and insistent. Even if the world did not accept her, I must. Even if I faltered, even if I stumbled, I would continue. She existed. She mattered. And I was beginning to understand that her existence, my existence, could not be erased by fear alone. As night fell, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. The bow, folded neatly on the table, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The blouse, carefully draped over the chair, seemed to whisper possibilities I hadn't dared imagine before. And inside me, a quiet certainty grew. The journey was only beginning. There would be trials, there would be fear, there would be moments when I would doubt myself entirely. But there was also discovery, exhilaration, and the deep, abiding truth that I was finally meeting her, finally meeting me. I closed my eyes and let the tension fall away, if only for a moment. Tomorrow, I thought, I will rise again. I will put on the blouse, tie the bow, and step into the world with trembling hands and an unshakable heart. And tomorrow, the world would see her too. The morning light slanted through my window in a way that made everything feel sharper, more urgent, and I realized with a jolt that I couldn't stay in the shadows any longer. The blouse and bow waited on the chair like patient sentinels, silent witnesses to the person I had started to become. I touched them gently, reverently almost, feeling the soft fabric beneath my fingers, imagining the way it would cling, move, and transform me once more. Each thread seemed to pulse with possibility, each fold of lace a map, leading me to a self I had long avoided. I dressed slowly, deliberately, savoring every sensation. The blouse slid over my shoulders like a caress, the bow weighted at my collar like a promise. I tied it carefully, feeling the familiar surge of electricity through my chest, that strange mixture of terror and exhilaration that had become my constant companion. As I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw hesitation entirely. I saw defiance, fragile but unyielding. Her face stared back at me, eyes wide and luminous, and for a moment, I almost whispered, "You are allowed to exist." The city outside waited for me, indifferent and immense, but I was different now. Every step I took felt like a negotiation, a delicate balance between the world's expectations and the truth I had finally claimed. My heart raced, but it wasn't just fear. It was the thrill of discovery, the pure intensity of being seen, fully, without apology. I noticed details I had never before considered. The sway of my hips, subtle adjustments in posture, the way the bow caught light with every turn of my head. Each gesture became a conversation with the world, a silent insistence that I was present and whole. But the world, as always, had its challenges. In a crowded cafe, I felt a stare that made my skin prickle. A couple at a nearby table murmured just enough for me to catch fragments, words like different and curious. My pulse hammered in my ears. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to vanish, to shrink into some safe, unremarkable version of myself. And yet, something deeper held me in place. I straightened, adjusted the bow at my collar, and allowed a small, careful smile to cross my lips. I didn't flee. I didn't apologize. I existed, fully, and for the first time, that felt revolutionary. Later, walking down a bustling street, I encountered someone I knew, an acquaintance from work, and froze. Recognition flared in their eyes, confusion followed quickly, and I felt the old panic rise like a tide. My mind raced with every possible response. Pretend nothing had changed, laugh it off, flee, disappear. But as our eyes met, I saw the question lingering there, unspoken but undeniable. Who are you now? And in that instant, I realized I didn't need to answer for anyone but myself. I simply nodded, a small acknowledgement, and kept walking. The act felt monumental. I had faced a direct confrontation with reality, and I had survived. Back at home, I undressed slowly, reverently, feeling the weight of the day settle into my bones. I traced the lines of the blouse, folded it with care, and allowed myself to breathe deeply. But sleep did not come easily. The city hummed beneath my window, distant and alive, and my mind wandered relentlessly. I replayed each glance, each whispered murmur, each fleeting judgment. And yet, beneath it all, there was a quiet joy, a profound recognition that I had endured, that I had existed authentically, and that this self, her, me, was undeniably real. The next days became a delicate rhythm, a dance between fear and exhilaration, retreat and exposure. I experimented with small details, the tilt of my chin, the curve of my shoulders, the subtle gestures that made her presence undeniable. Each movement, each glance in a reflective surface, was a negotiation between who I had been and who I was becoming. I discovered new pleasures in small affirmations, a passerby's curious smile, the way my hands rested naturally now, the quiet power in simply standing and existing. Yet the emotional turbulence remained. Moments of doubt struck without warning, an overheard comment, a fleeting glance of confusion, the echo of old insecurities, and I would retreat briefly into myself, questioning whether I could endure the scrutiny, whether the world could truly accept her, truly accept me. And yet, each time, the blouse, the bow, the reflection in the mirror called me back. I could not deny her, could not deny myself. The tension between fear and longing became a strange companion, a reminder that transformation is never simple, never linear. One evening, alone in the apartment, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror and froze. The bow was slightly askew, the blouse had wrinkled subtly, yet there was something radiant in the reflection. Not perfection, never perfection, but truth. I traced my jawline, touched my neck, ran my fingers lightly over my collarbone, and for the first time allowed a laugh to rise from my chest, raw, surprised, and entirely my own. I had not only survived, but I had discovered something fundamental. This self was not fragile. She was resilient. She was present. She was real. The days continued in this delicate tension, each encounter with the world a challenge and an affirmation. I learned to navigate spaces differently, to claim attention without arrogance, to exist without apology. Every glance, every murmur, every subtle reaction from others became a lesson, a mirror, a test of endurance. And with each passing day, the reflection in the mirror grew more familiar, more insistent, until she no longer felt like an experiment, a fantasy, or a borrowed identity. She was mine, wholly and irrevocably. And yet, even with growing confidence, there were moments of acute vulnerability. On quiet nights, when the city slept beneath me, I would sit by the window, blouse folded carefully on the chair, bow resting like a crown, and let the full weight of the journey settle in my chest. The longing, the fear, the exhilaration, they all surged together, a symphony of contradiction. I understood now that transformation was not a destination but a process, one that demanded patience, courage, and the willingness to confront every fragile, trembling piece of myself. By the time dawn crept through the blinds, painting the room in soft gold, I realized I was no longer the person who had hesitated in front of the mirror weeks ago. The blouse and bow were no longer just fabric. They were extensions of her, of me, of the truth I had claimed. I touched them gently, whispered a quiet promise to continue, to endure, to exist fully, and I knew, with unshakable certainty, that the path ahead would be both terrifying and magnificent. And I was ready. The morning felt heavier than usual, though the sunlight poured through the blinds in golden streaks. Today, I wasn't just stepping into the blouse and bow. I was stepping into something far bigger than my apartment, bigger than the mirror, bigger than the quiet, private confidence I had been building. I felt it in my chest, that familiar mix of fear and exhilaration, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing the wind had its own agenda. Every step toward the front door felt like crossing a threshold, a line that could not be uncrossed, a declaration I had yet to fully understand. I adjusted the bow at my collar for what felt like the 100th time, tracing the satin edges with trembling fingers, and studied my reflection. The blouse clung just right, accentuating curves that were not obvious before, shaping a presence I could no longer deny. I inhaled slowly, tasting the tension in the air, and whispered to myself, "You are allowed. You are here. You exist." The words felt almost sacred, each syllable reinforcing the fragile scaffolding of confidence I had been building day by day. Stepping outside, the city seemed sharper, more aware, almost conscious of my presence. Every passerby became a potential judge, every flicker of a glance a test. My heartbeat thudded painfully in my ears, and yet there was a strange thrill in simply moving, simply existing, simply being her. I caught my reflection in a glass storefront and froze, not out of fear, but recognition. She was there, unmistakable, real, and alive. Her eyes met mine, steady and luminous, and I felt a ripple of something like pride wash through me. But the world has a way of reminding you that visibility comes with risk. A group of coworkers appeared suddenly on the sidewalk ahead, their voices carrying in the crisp morning air. They hadn't seen me yet, and my stomach twisted with anticipation. My first instinct was to duck, to shrink, to disappear into the crowd. But I held myself upright, adjusted the bow again, and stepped forward, each movement deliberate, each breath a measured act of courage. Recognition flickered in their eyes, surprise, confusion, curiosity, and my pulse accelerated. One of them, usually so casual and indifferent, looked directly at me and asked a question that made my throat tighten. "Is that you?" Time seemed to stretch infinitely, the city blurring around us, leaving only their gaze and the taut awareness of myself. For a split second, I considered retreating, considered lying, considered letting the blouse and bow be erased by the world's expectation. But then I remembered the weeks of hesitation, the hours spent in front of mirrors, the quiet victories in my apartment, the first trembling steps outside. I lifted my chin, allowed a small but unwavering smile, and said, "Yes, it's me." The silence that followed was sharp, almost painfully so. I could feel every heartbeat, every microexpression, every question unspoken. And yet, beneath the fear, there was an undeniable thrill. I had spoken the truth aloud, and it had not broken me. The world hadn't crumbled. I hadn't vanished. I had simply existed, and for the first time, that felt powerful. The days that followed became an intricate negotiation between caution and audacity. Every encounter, every glance, every fleeting reaction from strangers, friends, or colleagues was a challenge I had to navigate carefully. I experimented with posture, with gestures, with subtle adjustments in expression. The blouse and bow were no longer mere clothing. They were extensions of her, instruments of identity, shields, and amplifiers all at once. I could feel the fabric on my skin as if it carried its own consciousness, a partner in this precarious dance between who I had been and who I was becoming. And yet, the emotional terrain was jagged and unforgiving. On one particular afternoon, walking through a crowded street, I overheard a comment meant to be private, words tossed like stones into the invisible space around me. "Who does she think she is?" My chest tightened, a wave of old insecurities crashing over me. The reflex to retreat surged violently, to dissolve into the anonymity of the crowd, to hide. But then I paused, felt the bow at my neck, remembered the weeks of careful self-discovery, and took a deliberate, unflinching step forward. I existed, I reminded myself, and no whispered judgment could erase that. Later that evening, alone in the apartment, I examined the reflection in the hallway mirror with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The bow was slightly crooked now from the day's movements. The blouse bore faint creases from hours of living in it, yet I stood firm. The tension of fear and longing, of exposure and liberation, had left marks not just on fabric but on posture, on presence, on something deeper that no mirror could fully capture. I traced my jawline, touched my collarbone, and for the first time allowed a deep, unrestrained sigh to escape. I am here, and I am myself. But self-discovery, I realized, is rarely linear. That night, my mind revisited every insecurity, every imagined judgment, every whispered murmur of the past. I questioned whether I was brave enough to continue, whether the world could truly accept her, or me. And yet, amid the tumult, there was a quiet clarity. Acceptance from the world was optional. My recognition, my ownership, my refusal to hide, these were the things that mattered. The blouse, the bow, the trembling hands, the racing heart, they had all been part of a process, a ritual of becoming that no external scrutiny could undo. The following morning, I awoke with a sense of determination that felt almost sacred. Today, I decided I would not retreat. Today, I would inhabit her fully, breathe fully, step into the city fully, without apology or hesitation. The bow was tied with care, the blouse smooth against my skin, and I stared at the reflection for a long, deliberate moment. She, the real me, looked back, patient and insistent, and I whispered a quiet vow. We will not hide. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And as I stepped into the morning light, feeling the city hum beneath my feet, I understood something profound. Transformation was not merely about clothing or bows or mirrors. It was about courage, about insistence, about claiming a space in the world that had always been mine. Every glance, every whisper, every test was part of a greater story, a story I was writing with trembling, determined hands. And I knew, with an intensity that shook me, that we would continue to write it, every day, in the face of fear, in the face of doubt, in the face of the world. The morning light came slowly, pale and cautious, like it was approaching a world it hadn't fully dared to illuminate. I lingered in my room, my fingers tracing the bow at my collar as if it contained all the answers I had been seeking for weeks. The blouse was smooth against my skin, familiar yet still electric, carrying the subtle tension of everything I had endured, the fear, the exhilaration, the trembling first steps, the whispered doubts in the middle of crowded streets. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, drinking in the reflection with deliberate attention, and finally, I saw her fully. Not a reflection. Not an experiment. Not a secret tucked away in shadows. She was real. I was real. And for the first time, there was no hesitation in acknowledging it. I stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the city buzzing around me as though nothing had changed. But everything had. I walked with a deliberate rhythm, each step a silent assertion, each sway of my body a conversation with the world that said, simply, I exist. I belong here. People passed by, some curious, some indifferent, some distracted entirely. I realized that for the first time, their reactions no longer dictated my sense of self. I was free from the old patterns of anxiety and self-consciousness, free from the constant calculation of acceptance or rejection. The bow at my neck and the blouse on my shoulders were no longer props. They were armor, instruments of presence, and declarations of authenticity. A friend unexpectedly called out to me from across the street, someone I had known for years, and my pulse quickened. Recognition sparked in their eyes, and I braced for confusion, for judgment, for the familiar wave of anxiety that had haunted every new step outside my apartment. But then their expression softened, curiosity tempered with warmth, and they said simply, "You look amazing." And in that moment, I realized something profound. It wasn't about approval. It wasn't about validation from the outside world. It was about permission. I had given myself permission to exist fully, visibly, unapologetically. And in doing so, the world, slowly, imperceptibly, began to reflect that truth back to me. I continued walking, feeling the city pulse beneath my feet, and something in me shifted. The journey of fear, of hesitation, of trembling at imagined glances, had transformed into something altogether different. Quiet confidence, grounded in reality, but tinged with the delicate magic of discovery. I caught my reflection in a shop window and studied the subtle nuances of who I had become. The curve of my jaw, the tilt of my chin, the natural sway of my hips, the way my hands rested without tension. She, the real me, was here, and she was unshakable. That afternoon, I decided to take a longer walk, further than I had ever dared. The streets were crowded, bustling, and every step was a negotiation with the past, the anxious whispers, the imagined ridicule, the ghostly shadows of old insecurities. And yet, each time I lifted my head, adjusted the bow, felt the blouse settle against my skin, I felt an undeniable thrill. It was as if every fiber of clothing, every fold of fabric, every subtle detail carried the story of my journey, a story that was now visible, tangible, unignorable. As I walked, I noticed a group of strangers on a park bench, laughing quietly, their energy warm and inviting. One of them glanced at me, curiosity in their eyes, and I realized I no longer cared if I was understood. I was simply being. My body, my posture, my presence spoke for me. And in that simple, unguarded act, I felt the culmination of weeks of fear, experimentation, hesitation, and courage coalesce into a single, undeniable truth. I am here, and I am whole. Evenings became a new kind of ritual. The blouse and bow, once symbols of fragile experimentation, became instruments of reflection. I would fold them carefully, lay them beside the mirror, and sit in silence, letting the tension of the day settle into my bones. I traced the lines of my neck, my jaw, my collarbones, marveling at the subtle ways in which I had shifted, how my posture had evolved, how every micro-gesture had been rewritten by deliberate, patient attention. I understood now that transformation was not instantaneous, nor was it simple. It was an accumulation of small victories, tiny assertions of presence, moments of courage that added up to something irrevocable. And then came the quiet, extraordinary realization that changed everything. It wasn't just that I had survived the fear of exposure. It wasn't just that I had endured the scrutiny of strangers, the imagined judgments of friends, the tremors of my own doubts. It was that I had found her, fully and irrevocably. She had always existed in fragments, in whispered fantasies, in shy glances at my own reflection, but now she was complete. And with her completeness came a freedom so profound that it made every moment of fear, every tremble, every second of hesitation feel like a necessary sacrifice to reach this clarity. I remember one evening, sitting by the window, bound neatly in place, blouse smooth against my shoulders, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, feeling a wind that carried both chill and promise. I whispered her name, softly, reverently, and realized that in doing so, I was whispering to myself. The version of me I had always hidden, the one I had only glimpsed in reflections and fantasies, was finally allowed to breathe. And she did. The journey had not been linear. It had been jagged, fraught with doubt, anxiety, and the relentless push of social expectation. There had been moments of retreat, moments when fear had gripped me like iron, moments when I had questioned whether the world, or even I, could accept her. But in every step forward, in every deliberate movement, in every choice to exist fully, I had discovered an irreducible truth. Identity is not given, it is claimed. And I had claimed mine. By the time night fell completely, the city quieted beneath me, and I felt an unparalleled stillness. The blouse and bow rested beside the mirror, symbols now of triumph rather than hesitation. I looked at myself one last time before sleep, tracing the line of my jaw, the slope of my shoulders, the tilt of my head, and I allowed a smile to rise, steady, real, luminous. I was here. She was whole. She was visible. And in that perfect, fleeting moment, I understood that the journey would continue, endlessly, but that I had arrived, at least in part, at a place of peace, of self-acceptance, of undeniable presence. I whispered softly to the empty room, to the reflection, to the city beyond. We exist. We are here. And we will continue. And as sleep finally claimed me, it felt like more than rest. It felt like a promise, a beginning, and a homecoming all at once.